The blood hit the floor before the gurney wheels stopped spinning. A Navy commander with a sucking chest wound shoved the nurse away with enough force to knock her into the wall, and the first words out of his mouth weren't "help me." They were "get her out of my sight." The trauma surgeon agreed. So did the charge nurse. So did the attending physician, who walked in 30 seconds later, glanced at the blonde woman in the corner, and looked straight through her like she was furniture. What none of them knew, what none of them had bothered to find out, was that the woman they'd just dismissed had kept men alive in conditions that would have made every one of them quit medicine entirely. They were about to find that out the hard way. If this story has you hooked already, follow along to the very end, because what happens next changes everything. Hit like and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The ambulance bay at Crestline Memorial Hospital smelled like burnt rubber and iron on the night of February 14th, which was either poetic or just ugly depending on how you looked at it. Lauren Mercer looked at it and thought, Tuesday. That was how she processed most nights at the hospital. Not by date, not by case, but by the particular flavor of chaos that walked through the bay doors. Tuesday chaos was different from Friday chaos. Friday was drunks and domestic calls, and occasionally something genuinely interesting. Tuesday was the leftover variety, the kind nobody warned you about in nursing school because Tuesday didn't have a personality. Tuesday just showed up. This Tuesday showed up with a military escort. 2 black SUVs cut into the ambulance lane ahead of the paramedic unit, and Lauren watched from the nurse's station window as 4 men in civilian clothes climbed out, moving like they were trying not to move like military, which meant they were military. She'd seen that walk enough times in her life to recognize the performance of it. The deliberate looseness in the shoulders, the measured pace, the eyes that never stopped cataloging exits. She was already moving toward the bay before dispatch finished the overhead announcement. Trauma incoming, Bay 3. Adult male, GSW to the left thorax, BP 88/60, GCS 12, ETA 90 seconds. Lauren had her gloves on by the time the ambulance backed in. The paramedic who jumped out first, young guy, maybe 26, name tag said Briggs, looked like he'd had a bad night even before this call. His face was tight in a way that meant the situation in the back of that truck had gone sideways at some point during transport and hadn't fully come back. Commander Dale Rutherford, 47, GSW, left chest, entry wound between the 4th and 5th rib. We've got an exit. Partial exit. It's ragged. BP is dropping despite 2 large-bore IVs running wide open. He's been talking, but it's getting worse. Lauren stepped up to take the secondary assessment position as they pulled the gurney out. Standard placement. She'd stood in this exact spot hundreds of times. What was not standard was the way Commander Dale Rutherford looked at her. He was big. Even strapped to the gurney and leaking blood from a hole in his chest, he was the kind of man who took up physical space through sheer force of presence. Square jaw, neck like a fire hydrant. The kind of fitness that didn't come from a gym membership, but from years of doing things gyms couldn't replicate. His left side was wrapped in a trauma dressing that had soaked through completely. His right hand was gripping the gurney rail hard enough that his knuckles were white. His eyes found Lauren and dismissed her in under a second. "Where's the doctor?" he said. His voice was still strong. That bothered her more than the blood, a chest wound that let you talk that clearly either wasn't as bad as it looked or was about to get catastrophically worse. "Sir, you're at Crestline Memorial. We're taking you into—" "I said, where's the doctor?" He pulled against the straps, not hard, just enough to make the point. "Not a nurse. I need a surgeon." Lauren didn't argue. She'd learned a long time ago that arguing with men like this in a moment like this was a waste of everyone's oxygen, including his. She just moved alongside the gurney and kept her eyes on the dressing. The breathing pattern was wrong. She clocked it on the second look. The asymmetry in his chest rise, the slight deviation in his trachea, the way he was working harder for air than the BP numbers alone could explain. The paramedics had called it a GSW with hemorrhage, which was accurate. But it wasn't the whole picture. Dr. Victor Strand met them in the trauma bay. Strand was 51 years old, had been at Crestline for 11 years, and had the particular brand of confidence that came from being consistently good at something without ever being genuinely tested. He was a competent surgeon. Lauren had worked alongside him for 3 years, and she knew that about him the way you know a road. You know where the smooth parts are, and you know where the potholes are, and you navigate accordingly. "What have we got?" he said, already pulling on gloves, already scanning the monitors. Briggs gave the handoff again. Strand nodded at the right moments, asked 2 clarifying questions, ordered the imaging. Lauren moved to the patient's left side. "Dr. Strand?" "Get his pressure up," Strand said, not to her specifically, just into the room. "Dr. Strand, I want to flag something about the—" "Lauren." He said her name the way you said, "Stop." "Let me do the assessment." Commander Rutherford turned his head toward her voice and said, "Is she always this pushy?" One of the men in civilian clothes who had followed the gurney into the bay, tall, late 30s, crew cut going gray at the temples, put his hand on the door frame and watched. He didn't say anything. He just watched. Lauren noticed him notice her. She stepped back. She did not go away. There's a difference between those 2 things, and it took her years to learn it. Going away meant leaving the problem behind you. Stepping back meant you were still in the room, still watching, still deciding your next move. She watched Strand run the primary survey. She watched him focus on the hemorrhage, which was the obvious problem, the loud problem, the problem that was bleeding onto the floor and demanding attention. She watched him call for blood products and a chest x-ray, and she watched him make the decision that the surgical team needed to be paged because this was going to the OR. And she watched the commander's trachea shift another 2 millimeters to the right. "Dr. Strand." Her voice came out flat and even. She'd learned that too. Not louder, not faster, just flatter. Flat got attention in ways that urgency didn't. "His trachea is deviating. I think we have a tension pneumo developing." Strand looked up from the chart he was annotating. The look he gave her was the kind of look that said, "I know what I'm doing, and you are not part of this conversation," without actually saying any of those words. "His breath sounds are equal bilaterally," Strand said. "I checked. When you checked, he was breathing differently. His right chest isn't moving the same way it was 60 seconds ago." "Lauren." This time it was Janet Kowalski, the charge nurse, from across the room. Janet was 53, efficient as a machine, and had strong opinions about nurses overstepping during active trauma resuscitations. "Let Dr. Strand work," Commander Rutherford said. "Somebody get this woman out of my bay." The man in the doorway with the gray-streaked crew cut. He hadn't moved. His eyes hadn't moved off Lauren, but he didn't speak. Lauren looked at the monitor. Heart rate 118, pressure 84/58, oxygen saturation 91 and trending. She pulled out her pen light and checked Rutherford's neck veins. Distended. She pressed 2 fingers gently to his trachea. The deviation was real, and it was getting worse. "Dr. Strand," she said, and her voice was still flat, but there was something underneath it now that was harder to ignore. "He is not bleeding to death. His lung is collapsing." The room went quiet for approximately 1 full second. Then Strand said, "We have a chest x-ray in 60 seconds, Lauren. I think we can—" The monitor alarm cut him off. Heart rate spiked to 138. Then the number started dropping instead of rising. 134, 128, 121. And the oxygen saturation cratered to 84, and the commander, who had been difficult and abrasive and entirely in command of himself 30 seconds ago, suddenly went glassy. "He's crashing," someone said. Strand moved. To his credit, he moved fast. But he moved toward the IV access, toward the blood pressure problem, toward the bleed, toward the answer he'd already decided on. Lauren was already at the crash cart. She had the decompression needle in her hand before anyone in the room had fully processed what she was doing. 14 gauge. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. She'd done this in a tent. She'd done this in a ditch. She'd done this once on a helicopter during a dust storm with someone else's blood on her hands and no lights except what was coming through the open door. She did it now on a hospital gurney under fluorescence with a trauma surgeon staring at her and a charge nurse saying her name like a warning. The needle went in. The hiss of air was immediate and unmistakable. The monitor responded in 4 seconds. Oxygen saturation climbed. Heart rate steadied. The commander's chest began rising evenly, both sides, the way it was supposed to. The room went very still. Lauren pulled the needle back and reached for the chest tube setup without looking at anyone. Tension pneumothorax, she said, to no one specifically. The bullet track must have clipped the pleura. Hemorrhage was the decoy. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Commander Rutherford was looking at the ceiling. His color was coming back. Not fully, not yet, but coming. His right hand had released the gurney rail. Dr. Strand stood with his hands at his sides. The expression on his face was not something Lauren looked at directly. She'd learned that too. It was the man in the doorway who moved first. He walked into the trauma bay with the kind of deliberate, unhurried movement that somehow cleared space without asking for it, and he stopped at the foot of the gurney and looked at Lauren. His eyes dropped to her left forearm, where the sleeve of her scrub top had ridden up 2 inches during the procedure, exposing the edge of a tattoo. Small, faded, a specific insignia that had no business being on a hospital nurse's arm. Something shifted in his face. He looked at her the way people looked at things they hadn't expected to see, and then he straightened. Not military formal, not performative, just straightened. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "That's a first medical response group patch." Lauren tugged her sleeve down. "Chest tube tray," she said to the tech behind her. "Let's keep him stable." Her name was not Rachel Hayes in this story, and it was not a story about a simple nurse. Lauren Mercer had been born in Decatur, Illinois, had enlisted at 19 and had spent 6 years doing work that the Army officially classified as medical support and unofficially classified as whatever it took. She'd deployed twice, spent 14 months in environments that didn't have names on public maps, and had come home with the kind of quiet that people who hadn't been there sometimes mistook for shyness. She wasn't shy. She'd just learned to be selective about what she said and to whom. She'd gotten her nursing degree at the University of Colorado at a school that didn't ask too many questions about the gaps in her civilian employment history. And she'd ended up at Crestline Memorial in Kettridge, Colorado because the pay was decent and the ER was busy enough to keep her from going too far inside her own head. 3 years. Long enough to know the rhythms of the place, short enough that she still hadn't told anyone much about herself. The nurses she worked with knew she was ex-military in a general sense the way they knew other things about her. That she took her coffee black, that she was fast with a needle, that she never raised her voice during a code. They didn't know specifics. She'd never offered them. The man with the crew cut knew something now that most of her coworkers didn't. His name was Marcus Teal, and after they got Commander Rutherford stabilized and moved to a monitored bay, he found Lauren at the supply room door and said, "Can I have 2 minutes?" "I'm still on shift," she said. "I know, 2 minutes." He wasn't asking in a pushy way. He was asking in the way of someone who understood that most meaningful conversations happened in doorways and supply rooms and not in conference rooms with agendas. Lauren looked at him for a moment, then stepped inside and let the door swing partly closed behind them. "You were first group," he said. It wasn't a question. "I was a lot of things a long time ago." Dale Rutherford asked for this hospital specifically. Teal's voice stayed low, measured. He had 3 other facilities closer to the extraction point. He chose Crestline. Lauren turned that over. "Why?" "We're still working on that." He paused. "Those men outside, why, were not his personal security. We were responding to a separate asset report when we got rerouted to his location. The people who shot him aren't going to know they missed for another few hours. When they figure it out, don't," Lauren said. He stopped. "I don't need the briefing," she said. "I'm a nurse. Whatever this is, it's not my problem." Teal looked at her steadily. "He's going to need watching tonight that goes beyond standard post-op monitoring. We have an ICU. Your ICU has 3 access points that aren't monitored and a duty roster that posts to a shared server every 12 hours. He let that sit. "I'm not asking you to solve anything. I'm asking you to keep your eyes open." Lauren said nothing. She picked up the supplies she'd come for and moved toward the door. "Whoever you were before," Teal said to her back, "you still knew what to do in there." She pushed through the door without responding. The next 3 hours were ordinary in the specific way that busy ER nights were ordinary. Not quiet, not slow, but settled into a rhythm that had its own logic. A car accident came in at 11:15, 2 patients, one serious, one scared. A chest pain at 11:50 that turned out to be a panic attack and took 40 minutes to talk down. A laceration, a pediatric fever, The usual Tuesday inventory. Lauren moved through all of it the way she moved through everything, efficiently, quietly, without drama. At 1:20 a.m., she passed Rutherford's Bay on her way to the break room and stopped. He was awake. That itself was not alarming. Vitals were stable, the chest tube had drained well, he wasn't scheduled for surgery until morning. But he was awake in the focused way, not the restless post-sedation way, and his eyes found her immediately through the glass. She went in. "Nurse." He said it differently than he had in the trauma bay. The hostility was gone, or at least set aside. What was left was just exhaustion and something harder to name. "What's your name?" "Mercer." "Mercer." He shifted slightly against the pillow, wincing. "I was an ass to you earlier." "You were in shock and you'd just been shot. People have been worse." He looked at her for a moment. "The thing you did. Standard procedure." It wasn't standard for a nurse. He said it without the edge this time. "I spent 20 years around medics. What you did was... Where did you do your time?" "A while ago." "First Medical Response Group." He said it precisely, like he was reading something he'd already filed. "There were 12 women in that unit over the entire operational period. 11 of them I can account for." Lauren was quiet. "I'm the one who wrote the assessment report that got the unit's records classified," Rutherford said. 4 years ago. I know who should be on that list." The monitors beeped. Somewhere down the hall a door opened and closed. "You should sleep," Lauren said. "I should." He didn't close his eyes. "There's a drive, small, about the size of my thumbnail. It's in my left boot. If something happens to me tonight, nothing is going to happen to you. You're in a hospital." He looked at her the way people looked when they were deciding whether to say the next thing. Then he said, 3 of the people who tried to kill me tonight have federal credentials." Lauren stood very still. "I know who they work for," he said, "and they know I know. The drive has everything." He paused. "I chose this hospital because I needed someone who would understand what was on it. Someone who'd been close enough to see what was wrong and far enough away that they weren't already compromised." His eyes didn't leave hers. "Lauren Mercer, I had a feeling you'd still be here." The hiss of the ventilation system, the soft alarm from 2 bays down, quickly silenced. "You've known who I was," Lauren said. "Since last year. And you chose to come here. I chose to trust you to figure out the right thing to do." He looked at the ceiling. "I'm not wrong about that." Lauren stood at the foot of his bed and thought about the small, faded tattoo on her forearm and the 6 years she'd spent trying to put distance between who she was now and who she'd been, and the particular exhaustion of being dismissed by people who would have been desperate for her help 30 seconds later. She thought about Teal in the doorway and the access points that weren't monitored. She thought about the 14-gauge needle and the hiss of air and the way the room had gone still. "Get some rest," she said finally. "I'll check on you in an hour." She walked back out to the nurse's station and sat down and looked at the desk and thought about what she was going to do. At 1:48 a.m., a black sedan pulled into the Crestline Memorial visitor parking lot and did not find a parking space. It stopped instead near the ambulance bay entrance, engine running. Lauren saw it on the external camera feed that nobody watched unless someone specifically pulled it up. She was specifically pulling it up because she'd made herself a coffee and needed something to look at while she decided whether or not to care about a parked car. 2 men got out. Suits. Late night. Moving like Teal moved, but not as well at hiding it. They went to the main entrance. Lauren picked up her radio and pressed the call button for security. Security at Crestline consisted of 2 overnight guards, Paul Henshaw, 61, who did crosswords, and a newer guy whose name Lauren could never remember. And she got Paul, who said, "Yep," when she described the 2 men, and then went quiet in the way that meant he was going to check, and probably not in a hurry. She set down the radio and went to Rutherford's Bay. He was still awake. 2 men, she said quietly. "Main entrance. They're not here for treatment." He nodded slowly, like this was information he'd been waiting for rather than surprised by. "The drive." "I'm not getting your drive." "Lauren, I'm calling the people you came in with," she said. "Teal left a number." Rutherford was quiet for a moment. Then, "They'll try to get me out of the building." Probably. I can't be moved. The tube. I know. She looked at the chest tube, the drainage system, the IV lines. I know. He looked at her carefully. You're going to keep me here. I'm going to do my job, she said, which is keeping my patient alive and in the place where he can best receive care. She paused. If that happens to create some complications for people who shouldn't be here, that's a separate problem. A sound at the end of the hall. Lauren turned. Through the window of Rutherford's bay, she could see the two men in suits being escorted, or attempting to be escorted, by Paul Henshaw and someone in a white coat she didn't immediately recognize. They were moving toward the monitored unit, toward this bay. They had badges. Lauren had seen enough badges in her life to know that a badge was a tool, and tools had a wide range of legitimate and illegitimate applications. She pulled the bay door mostly closed and looked at Rutherford. You said you know who sent them, she said. Yes. How high does it go? He met her eyes. High enough that the people I trust can be counted on one hand, and two of them are the men who rode in with me tonight. The footsteps in the hallway were getting closer. Lauren thought about the 6 years she'd spent stepping back and going quiet, and making herself smaller than she was. She thought about the way Strand had said her name like a stop sign. She thought about the commander's dismissal when he walked through the bay doors, the way the room had emptied her out of the picture, the way it always went. She thought about a hiss of air and a monitor climbing back to life. She moved to the door of the bay and opened it fully, and stepped into the hallway, and stood in the middle of it with her arms at her sides. And when the two men in suits got close enough to see her clearly, she said, in a voice that was very level and very deliberate, "This patient is not available for visitor contact. If you have a medical concern, I can get you a physician. If you have law enforcement credentials, I'll need to see them verified through hospital administration before anyone enters this bay. That process takes approximately 40 minutes. She paused. Or you can go back to the waiting room. The taller of the two men looked at her the way men like him looked at obstacles, calculating. We have federal authority to say, you have federal credentials, Lauren said. That's different. Federal authority over a patient in my care requires paperwork that nobody has presented to anyone in this building tonight. I'm happy to help you get that started. She gestured toward the nurse's station. There's a form. There was, in fact, no specific form for this, but they didn't know that. The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her at the closed bay where Rutherford was lying with a chest tube and classified information in his boot. Then he looked back at her. We'll be back, he said. I'll have the paperwork ready, Lauren said. She watched them walk back down the hall, and she did not move until they were through the double doors. Then she turned and went back into the bay and picked up the phone on the bedside table and called the number Teal had given her. He picked up on the second ring. How fast can you get here? She said. There was a brief pause. 20 minutes. Make it 10. She kept her voice even. And come in through the service entrance on the east side. I'll leave it unlocked. She hung up and looked at Commander Rutherford. His eyes were steady. His breathing was even. You're not going to walk away from this, he said. It wasn't a question. Lauren looked at the faded edge of the tattoo on her forearm. I didn't walk away the first time, she said. They just stopped asking me to come back. She pulled up the chair beside his bed and sat down and opened the camera feed on the wall-mounted tablet, and she watched the parking lot, and she waited. At 2:11 a.m., the black sedan made a second pass through the lot. Slower this time. At 2:14 a.m., a second vehicle pulled in. Different make, different color. It parked properly, and the lights went off, and no one got out for 4 full minutes. Lauren counted those minutes. At 2:18 a.m., her phone buzzed. Teal's number. East door. Don't let them move him. She was already standing. Book. This is a work of complete fiction created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are entirely fictional. She was already standing when the door opened. Teal came through first, moving fast but not running. There's a difference, and operators knew it, because running drew attention and fast was invisible if you did it right. He had 2 men behind him, neither of whom Lauren had seen before. One was short and broad, maybe 35, with the kind of stillness that meant he was running calculations constantly. The other was younger, early 30s, carrying a bag that clinked faintly when he set it down. Mercer. Teal's voice was low. Talk to me. Two men in suits came through main entrance at 148. Federal credentials, unverified. I turned them around on a paperwork technicality. She kept her voice at the same level his was. Second vehicle in the lot. No movement for 6 minutes. They're not here to talk. Teal looked at Rutherford. Rutherford said, Voss. Something passed across Teal's face. Not surprise exactly. More like the confirmation of something he'd been hoping wasn't true. They sent Voss, Teal said. The man doesn't waste middle management, Rutherford said. If he's here, they already know the hospital. They'll have the exits. The younger operator, Lauren would later learn his name was Garrett, had already moved to the window and was looking at the parking lot without touching the blinds. 2 vehicles. The sedan's moved. It's on the south side now. He paused. There's a third. Van. Service entrance. Lauren's chest did something complicated. She'd unlocked the east service door for Teal 20 minutes ago. How long ago did the van arrive? Recent. Garrett turned from the window. It's not ours. She walked to the hall door and looked both ways. Paul Henshaw was nowhere. The nurse's station had the overnight tech, a 23-year-old named Brianna, who was doing homework between patient checks and had absolutely no idea what was happening 30 feet away. Lauren went back inside. We cannot move him, she said, to the room, to whoever needed to hear it. The chest tube, we know, Teal said. If you pull that tube and try to transport him without proper drainage, you risk recollapse and tension recurrence. In an uncontrolled environment without Mercer, his voice was quiet. We're not moving him. She stopped. We're going to hold this position, Teal said. I have 2 more people 4 minutes out. We just need... The lights went out, not the whole hospital. The emergency generators kicked in within 3 seconds, and the hallway fluorescents came back at reduced power, that particular yellowed half-light that hospitals use during backup. But in those 3 seconds, the monitors in Rutherford's bay ran on internal battery, and the rhythm of the building changed entirely. Brianna's voice came from the nurse's station. What the... Is that a power issue, or... Stay at the station, Lauren called out. It's a generator switch, standard protocol. Stay put. It wasn't a generator switch. Teal already had his phone out. He typed something, put it away, looked at Lauren. They cut the primary feed to this wing. Security cameras are down. Garrett said from the window. Van's moving. The broad, quiet operator, Lauren learned later his name was Polk, positioned himself beside the bay door without anyone telling him to. He had something in his hand that Lauren didn't look at directly. Rutherford's voice came from the bed. The drive. I'm not getting your drive, Lauren said. Lauren. His voice had changed. Not commanding now. Something more direct than that. If they take me or they take this room, that drive disappears. Everything on it disappears. 14 people I can personally connect to an operation that killed 11 soldiers and buried the investigation. 14. He paused. My left boot. It's in a sealed compartment in the heel. 11 soldiers. She stood in the half-dark and looked at the faded tattoo on her forearm and thought about a number she'd spent 4 years trying not to attach to names. I knew some of them, she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. She crossed to the foot of the bed and found his left boot on the shelf beneath the gurney where the paramedics had stored his personal effects. The heel was modified. She felt the seam when she ran her thumb along the edge, a thin line that shouldn't have been there. She pressed in the right place and a small compartment opened, and inside was a drive roughly the size of her thumbnail, matte black, nothing written on it. She put it in her scrub pocket and set the boot back. If something happens to you, she said. I know, Rutherford said. I mean, if something happens to you because these people get into this room and I'm the one standing here. I know what I'm asking, he said. I picked this hospital because I needed someone who understood both sides of what's on that drive. The medical records, the operational timeline. You were there for part of it. You'll know what you're reading. He looked at the ceiling. I'm sorry I was an ass to you. You said that already. Worth saying again. A sound in the hall. Not footsteps, something softer. A door, a long way off, opening in a way that doors weren't supposed to open at 2 a.m. Polk moved 2 inches and stopped moving and became very still. Teal was at Lauren's shoulder. "We need you to do something," he said quietly. "Not because you owe us anything, because you're the only person in this building who can do it." "What?" "There's a physician, Dr. Strand. He's the attending of record." "He's on overnight call," Lauren said. "He'd be in the call room on 4. We need someone to get to him before they do. If they get to the attending first, they can use him to authorize transfer paperwork. They'll pull Rutherford out of here with a physician's signature and a federal badge, and it'll look completely legitimate." Lauren thought about Strand, about the way he'd said her name in the trauma bay, about the look on his face after the needle and the hiss of air. Strand won't cooperate with, he won't have a choice if they're holding a badge and he doesn't know what's actually happening, Teal said. He's a surgeon, not an intel analyst. He'll do what the credentials tell him to do. She ran the building in her head. 4th floor, East Wing, call room 4C. Stairwell B was faster than the elevator. The half-lit corridor between the ED and the main tower was a problem because it was long and open and anyone in the van outside would have line of sight to the ground floor windows. "How much time?" she asked. "Garrett," Teal said. "Van stopped at the loading dock," Garrett said from the window without turning. "They're staging. 5 minutes, maybe 6. Lauren was already moving. She took the back corridor behind the nurses' station, past the supply room, through the door that connected to the main hospital's circulation spine. The half-power lighting turned everything amber and strange. She passed a janitor's cart parked against the wall and a bulletin board covered in outdated shift schedules and a drinking fountain that had been out of order since November. Stairwell B was cold. They kept it cold because nobody used it. Her feet on the concrete steps were the only sound, and she counted the flights by feel rather than looking at the painted numbers on the wall. 4th floor, East Corridor. She pushed through the fire door. Call room 4C was at the end. She knocked twice and didn't wait. Strand was awake. He was sitting on the edge of the cot in the clothes he'd been wearing during the trauma case, minus the white coat, and there was a coffee cup on the desk that looked like it had been sitting there long enough to stop being worth drinking. He looked up when she came in, and his face went through several things in quick succession. Surprise, irritation, then something else when he saw her expression. "Mercer," he said. "2 men are in this building right now trying to get your authorization to transfer Commander Rutherford," she said. "They're going to use federal credentials, and they're going to make it sound routine. It is not routine. If you sign anything they put in front of you, you'll be authorizing the removal of a patient under active threat who has a chest tube and no transport-capable monitoring and who will very likely not survive the transfer because that's the point." Strand stared at her. "They cut the power to the ED wing," she said. "The cameras are down." He stood up slowly. "Who are these?" "I can't fully answer that, not right now." She looked at him directly. "I know I'm not your favorite person. I know this is a strange conversation to be having at 2 a.m. But I need you to not authorize anything for Rutherford tonight, from anyone, until you've verified their credentials through hospital administration directly. Not through them, directly." He was quiet. "You were right earlier," he said finally. "In the trauma bay." Lauren didn't say anything. "I should have listened." He picked up his white coat from the chair back. "The tension pneumo. I had the same instinct and I talked myself out of it. It happens. I dismissed you before I even—" He stopped. "It wasn't about the medicine." "Dr. Strand." Her voice came out carefully. "I need to know if you're going to do what I'm asking." He put the coat on. "Yes," he said. "What do you need me to do?" "Lock this door. Don't answer it for anyone you don't personally recognize. Call hospital security and tell them there are unauthorized individuals in the building. Use your physician authority. It'll get a faster response than anything I can do. And don't use the hospital phone system for anything sensitive because I don't know if their access extends to—" Her radio crackled. Brianna's voice, high and fast. "Lauren, there are men at the nurses' station. They're asking me to pull a patient file and I don't—" Lauren keyed the radio. "Brianna, step away from the station. Go to the medication room and lock the door. Do it now." A pause. "Okay," Brianna said. "Okay." Lauren looked at Strand. "Lock this door," she said again. She was already backing into the hallway. She took the stairs 2 at a time, going down, which was harder than going up in the dark, and she caught the railing once when her foot hit wrong and kept moving. Second floor, first floor, through the fire door into the amber-lit corridor. She could hear voices from the direction of the nurses' station. She didn't go back to the station. She went the long way through the back corridor and came in through the supply room door that opened behind the central desk, which meant she came up behind the 2 men in suits from an angle they weren't expecting. There were 3 of them now, not 2. The third was broader than the other 2 and had the kind of face that had been rearranged at some point and settled back into something functional, but not quite the original arrangement. He was holding a transfer authorization form on a clipboard, which was almost impressively bold, Lauren thought, in the way that only truly confident operations were bold. Brianna was not in the medication room. Brianna was standing at the desk with her arms crossed and her face set in the expression of someone who was terrified and refusing to show it, which Lauren thought was unexpectedly decent of her. "This patient transfer requires attending physician authorization," Brianna was saying. Her voice was shaking slightly, but she wasn't backing up. "I can't process this without... We have federal authority to... But I'm sure you do," Lauren said from behind the desk. All 3 men turned. She recognized the dynamic immediately. The shift in their body language that happened when someone appeared from an unexpected direction. They'd been focused forward. She'd come from behind the problem. "Whatever she's told you," the broad man said, meaning Brianna, "this is a lawful federal operation." "Then you'll have no problem waiting for our attending physician to review the paperwork," Lauren said. She moved to stand beside Brianna, close enough to be a statement. "I've already paged him. He's on his way down." This was not true, but they didn't know that. The 2 men looked at each other in the small, quick way that people looked when they were recalculating. "Ma'am," the broad man said, "we don't need to make this difficult." "I'm not making it anything," Lauren said. "I'm following patient care protocol. You're welcome to wait." She gestured toward the chairs near the entrance, the ones used by families. "There's coffee down the hall. It's bad, but it's hot." The broad man stared at her for a long moment. He had the kind of eyes that were used to people looking away first. Lauren didn't look away. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it once and looked back up and said to the other 2, something quiet that Lauren couldn't hear. And all 3 of them moved toward the exit. Not fast, but moving. The broad man was last. At the door, he turned back. "You're making a mistake, he said. Lauren said, "I've made worse." She watched them go. Then she turned to Brianna, who had uncrossed her arms and was now gripping the edge of the desk hard enough that her fingers had gone white. "You did well," Lauren said. "I'm shaking," Brianna said. "That's okay. You can shake and still do the right thing." Lauren was already reaching for her radio. "Go lock yourself in the break room, not the med room. The break room, it has a better lock. Don't open it for anyone except me." Brianna went. Lauren keyed the radio for Teal. Silence for 3 seconds. Then, "We have a problem." His voice had changed. Something in it had tightened. "What happened?" she said. "Rutherford." A pause that was 1 second too long. "He tried to access his phone. Someone must have put a location ping on it, because within 90 seconds of him turning it on, we picked up a signal acquisition on the external feed. They know exactly where in the building he is." Lauren was already moving back toward the bay. "There's something else," Teal said. She pushed through the doors into the ED wing, half-lit amber. The monitor beeps from the other bays, distant and ordinary and completely disconnected from what was happening. "Tell me," she said. "The men who just left your station." Another pause. "They didn't go to the parking lot." She stopped walking. "The cameras are still down," Teal said, but Garrett tracked them visually until he lost them at the West Corridor junction. His voice was careful and exact in the way of someone conveying information precisely because the precision mattered. "That junction has one direction that leads to the exit." He stopped. "And the other direction," Lauren said. "Leads to the stairwell," Teal said. "The one that goes up to the ICU intake bay." She started running. She hit the stairwell door with her shoulder and took the stairs without counting them. The problem with running in a hospital at 2 a.m. was that it meant something, and everyone who saw it knew it meant something, and there was no way to run that looked casual. Lauren ran anyway. She took the turns tight, kept her hand on the railing for the corners, and came out on the second-floor landing breathing harder than she wanted to be. The ICU intake bay was through the fire door and left down the main corridor. 40 feet. She could see the bay window from the stairwell door. The light inside still on, which meant the monitors were running on backup battery, which meant nobody had cut power to this specific room yet, which meant she'd gotten here first. She pushed through the fire door and covered the 40 feet fast and came into the bay and stopped. Polk was on the floor. Not dead. She checked that in the first second the way training made you check. His chest was moving and his eyes were open, and he was pressing his right hand against his left forearm with the particular focused pressure of a man doing his own hemorrhage control. A laceration. Long, not deep, bleeding steadily enough to be serious about, but not in the range that ended conversations. "How many?" she said. 2 came through the north access. His voice was tight but coherent. Garrett redirected one toward the loading bay. The other got past me. He nodded toward the interior door that connected the intake area to the main ICU corridor. "He's in the building." Lauren looked at Rutherford. He was sitting up. He'd pulled himself up against the head of the bed using the rail, which had to have hurt considerably given the chest tube, and he had his face set in the expression of a man who had decided that pain was a later problem. "Lie back down," she said. "Is Polk? He'll keep. Lie down." She moved to Polk and crouched and looked at the laceration. Straight-edged, something with a blade about 8 centimeters. "Pressure's good. Don't let up." She straightened and went to the supply cabinet on the bay wall and pulled out 2 trauma dressings and brought them back and put one in Polk's free hand. "When the first one saturates, swap it. Don't move from this position." "I wasn't planning on it," Polk said. Teal's voice came through her radio. "Mercer, the north access is compromised. I'm coming to you, but I'm 60 seconds out." "Copy," she said. She looked at the interior door. It had a badge reader. Standard hospital access control. The kind that required staff ID to open from the corridor side, but could be pushed through from inside. The kind that was almost useless as a barrier once someone was already on the interior side of the system, which the third man now was. Lauren went to the door and pushed it to make sure it was seated in the frame. It was. She looked around the bay. Supply cabinet, bed, monitor stand, IV pole, the chair she'd been sitting in, a crash cart that had been moved against the south wall. She pulled the IV pole free of its base mounting and slid it through the door handle bracket. It wouldn't hold against determined force for long, but determined force took time and made noise, and right now she would take 3 seconds of noise as a warning. Rutherford watched her do it. "You've done room defense before," he said, "once or twice." "Where?" She looked at him. "Somewhere that wasn't on any public map." He nodded like that was an answer he recognized. Through the door, she could hear nothing. That was the part that was harder to work with than noise. The silence that meant someone was moving carefully. Amateur threats made noise. Trained threats went quiet, and the quiet was its own kind of pressure. She picked up her radio again. "Teal, I have 1 hostile in the ICU corridor, moving quiet. I have Polk down, non-critical, patient stable. I need the north access closed before you come to me." "North access is Garrett's problem right now." "How long?" "Working on it." That meant she didn't know. Lauren looked at the crash cart. She looked at Rutherford. She looked at the IV pole wedged in the door handle and thought about the difference between a barrier and a weapon, and the fact that in the right circumstances, the same object was both. "The people Teal mentioned," she said to Rutherford. 2 more en route. How long ago did he say that?" "In the parking lot when we came in, he said 4 minutes. That had been," she checked the clock on the monitor, 11 minutes ago. They should already be here." The IV pole rattled. 1 sharp tap, then silence. Testing. Lauren moved to the crash cart and opened the top drawer and looked at what she had. Defibrillator paddles, drugs she wasn't going to use as weapons, a laryngoscope handle that had some weight to it. She took the handle. She felt slightly ridiculous and put that feeling aside. Rutherford said quietly, "Left bedside table, bottom drawer." She looked at him. "I had a bag when I came in," he said. "They took most of it. They didn't get everything." She opened the drawer. Inside was a folded piece of cloth, a trauma wrap, standard issue, and underneath it, a compact semi-automatic pistol that had no business being in a hospital bedside table and was there anyway because Rutherford was the kind of man who thought several moves ahead even when he was bleeding. "That's not mine," she said. "It is right now," he said. She picked it up. It had the weight of something that had been carried and maintained, not something decorative. She checked the chamber the way she'd been taught a long time ago, and the way the body remembered even when the mind had been trying to forget. Loaded, safety on. The IV pole rattled again. Then, a sound she'd been half expecting, the soft electronic tone of an override card being used on the badge reader. Someone on the corridor side had access to a hospital credential. The door pushed inward. The IV pole held for 2 seconds, then skidded sideways on the floor as the door opened 6 inches, and through the gap she could see the edge of a dark suit jacket and a hand that was not empty. Lauren put herself against the wall beside the hinge side of the door, not in front of it, not behind it, beside it. And when the door came fully open, she was in the blind spot that every door had on the hinge side, the 6-inch strip of space that opened behind the door as it swung. The man who came through was broad-shouldered and moving fast and scanning the room, and by the time he had registered that the nurse was not where he expected her to be, Lauren had his gun arm controlled and his wrist bent at an angle that made voluntary grip impossible. And the weapon he'd been holding dropped to the floor, and she put her knee into the back of his, and he went down hard enough that the floor felt it. She wasn't trained to hold a takedown without backup. She knew that. What she was trained to do was create a pause, a break in the momentum of a threat that gave someone else time to arrive and close the gap. Teal came through the door 30 seconds later. 30 seconds is not a long time in most contexts. In the context of keeping a 210-pound man controlled on a hospital floor without a second person, it was long enough that Lauren had a bruise forming on her right forearm and had lost her grip twice and recovered it twice and was running primarily on the knowledge that letting go was not an option. Teal assessed the situation in under 2 seconds and handled the next part of it, and Lauren stepped back and let him. And then she was leaning against the wall, breathing through her nose and looking at her hands. Rutherford said from the bed, "You can put the laryngoscope handle down." She looked at her left hand. She was still holding it. She set it on the crash cart. "The other two," she said to Teal. "Garrett has them contained at the loading bay." He was using a zip tie from his jacket on the man on the floor, which was a remarkably practical thing to carry in a jacket, Lauren thought. "And the 2 additional personnel I called in are on site. We have the building." "What about the van?" "Gone." He stood. "They pulled it when the operation went sideways. Which means whoever's running this is cutting losses, and the people who came inside are now liabilities as far as their own chain of command is concerned." He looked at the man on the floor, who was conscious and not saying anything, with the practiced silence of someone who knew the value of it. "We're past the immediate threat." Lauren processed that. "Past it," she said, "or past this version of it." Teal looked at her. "Past this version of it," he agreed. She crossed to Polk and checked his dressing. He'd managed the swap himself, which was good. The bleeding had slowed to a level that was serious, but not critical. "You need sutures," she said. "I know. I can do that here." "I know that too." He looked up at her with an expression that was somewhere between wry and exhausted. "I've heard about your needlework." She went to get the suture kit. It took 40 minutes to sort out the immediate aftermath. Polk's arm sutured in the bay with local anesthetic and a headlamp because the main lights were still at half power. The man from the floor secured and turned over to Garrett. A call made to someone in Teal's network that Lauren wasn't on and wasn't intended to be on, and a second call that involved Teal walking into the corridor and speaking very quietly for 4 minutes. Rutherford's vitals held. The chest tube was draining appropriately. His oxygen saturation was 96% on 2 liters, which was good enough. Strand came down from the 4th floor at some point during all of this and stood in the bay doorway, looking at the aftermath of a hospital room that had clearly been the site of something, and Lauren watched his face work through several emotions and settle on something that wasn't quite any of the ones she expected. He said to Lauren, "What do you need?" which was not the question she'd expected. Check his tube site, she said. He moved around more than he should have. Strand came in and did the assessment with the focused efficiency she'd always known he was capable of, the efficiency he'd shown in 100 routine cases. And he didn't say anything unnecessary, and he didn't ask questions that were actually statements. When he was done, he said, "Tube's fine, site's intact. He'll need imaging in the morning." "I know," Lauren said. Strand stood at the foot of the bed for a moment. He looked at Rutherford, then at Lauren, then at the suture line on Polk's arm drying under a bandage. "You trained as a combat medic," Strand said. "Not a question anymore?" "Army," she said. "How long?" 6 years. He was quiet. "I've been a trauma surgeon for 17 years, he said. "I've never seen a nurse perform a needle decompression that fast and that clean outside of a simulation." Lauren said nothing. "I want to say something," Strand said. He had the slightly pained look of a man who was honest with himself enough to know when he owed something and not quite comfortable enough with it to do it easily. "In the trauma bay. Earlier. I didn't listen because of what I assumed, not because of anything you'd done or hadn't done. Dr. Strand, I'm not saying this for your benefit," he said. "I'm saying it because I need to hear myself say it." He looked at the floor for a second. "Rutherford would be dead if you hadn't been there, if you'd gone away when I said your name like that." He looked up. "I need to think about why I said it." The monitors beeped softly. Rutherford was looking at the ceiling. Lauren said, "We can talk about it some other time." "Yeah," Strand said, "we can." He picked up his clipboard. "I'll be in the call room. Page me if his pressure moves." He left. Teal came back from the corridor. "We have a bigger problem," he said. She waited. "The man we contained, Garrett ran his credentials." He sat down in the chair near the door, which was the first time she'd seen him sit. It told her something about where the energy level was now. His federal ID is legitimate. FBI, field office out of Denver, which means whoever sent him had enough reach to use actual federal personnel. "Or he's dirty," Lauren said. He's dirty," Teal said. "But the infrastructure that let him get here, get credentials, get an override card for this hospital's badge system. That's not one person being dirty. That's an operation with institutional support." Rutherford said from the bed, "Voss?" Both of them looked at him. "Admiral Harlan Voss," Rutherford said, "Deputy Director of the Joint Operational Planning Committee, which has oversight connections to 4 federal agencies, including the FBI's Domestic Intelligence Division." He turned his head to look at them. "He's been building this for 11 years. The operation that killed those soldiers, it wasn't a field mistake. It was a resource extraction. Classified intelligence was being sold. The soldiers found out. The operation was created to remove them and classify the evidence, and Voss has had the access and the authority to maintain that classification ever since." The room was quiet enough that Lauren could hear the ventilation system. 11 soldiers, she said. 11 confirmed, Rutherford said. "The unit." "Lauren, the unit you were attached to, the medical response group, the casualties from the Delker Valley operation. Do you remember?" She remembered. She'd spent 4 years trying to stop remembering with mixed results. 4 killed, she said. The report said it was hostile fire during extraction. "The report was wrong," Rutherford said. "The extraction was compromised from inside. Voss provided the location data to an asset who fed it to the opposing force. The 4 who died, they had documentation of the resource extraction, physical documentation. Voss needed it recovered and them removed before they could get it out." Lauren felt something cold and very still settle in her chest. "I was there," she said. "You were there," Rutherford said. "You were on the medevac helicopter that pulled the survivors. You filed a discrepancy report about the timeline." She had. She'd filed it and it had gone nowhere, and she'd been told the timeline inconsistency was a documentation error, and 6 months later she'd been involuntarily separated from her unit on a reduction in force reclassification that she'd never been able to get a straight answer about. And she'd taken her nursing degree and come to Crestline Memorial in Kettridge, Colorado, and made herself quiet. "Voss flagged your separation," Rutherford said. "He wanted you watched, not prosecuted. You were a loose thread, but a minor one. You'd filed a report, but you didn't have the documentation. You were easier to sideline than to deal with. He paused. The drive has everything: the original intelligence logs, the location data transfer, the communication chains, the financial records from the asset payments. 14 people, Voss at the top, all connected. She put her hand in her scrub pocket and felt the small, matte black drive. "Why now?" she said. "You've had this for how long?" 14 months of building the chain of evidence, Rutherford said. "I couldn't go public with it until the chain was complete. Partial evidence gets classified and buried. Complete evidence goes to oversight that Voss doesn't control." He looked at her carefully. "There's a congressional subcommittee. Armed Services Subcommittee on Intelligence Oversight. The chair is Representative Diana Khalil. She's been pushing for an independent review of the Delaware Valley operation for 3 years without enough to open a formal investigation." "The drive gives her enough," Teal said. "The drive gives her everything," Rutherford said. Lauren looked at the drive in her hand. It was lighter than it had any right to be given what was apparently on it. "You need to transmit it," she said. "Directly and securely," Rutherford said. "Not through any channel Voss has access to, which means not through any federal communications infrastructure." Teal said, "We have a secure transmission system, but we need the recipient to be verified and online simultaneously, which means we need to contact Khalil's office directly." He paused. "At 3 a.m. Her chief of staff is a man named Owen Park," Rutherford said. "He has a personal cell number that goes to him directly, not through any office system. I have it memorized." He looked at Teal. "You need to make that call." "You need to make that call," Teal said. "It's your operation. He'll need voice verification from you." Rutherford sat up more fully against the head of the bed, which was visibly painful and which he did anyway. "Give me a phone," he said. "Not the hospital line." Teal produced a phone and Rutherford took it and dialed from memory. 7 digits, then the area code prefix, correct sequence. Lauren watched him do it and thought about a man who had memorized a number 14 months ago and carried it through whatever had led to getting shot on a Tuesday night in February. The call connected on the 3rd ring. Owen Park, voice rough with sleep but alert fast. Some people woke up slow and some woke up fast, and this one was fast. "This is Commander Dale Rutherford. I need you to write down a verification code." Rutherford's voice was steady and authoritative in the way that was separate from pain and volume. "Clearwater, November, 77 Foxtrot. Read it back." A pause. Then Park's voice, reading it back correctly. "Wake Representative Khalil," Rutherford said. "I need her on a secure line in the next 15 minutes. I have a complete intelligence package for Delaware Valley. Chain of evidence, financial records, communication logs, 14 names. I'm transmitting tonight." He paused. "Yes, tonight. Right now." Lauren moved to the window while he talked and looked out at the parking lot. Teal's people had it. She could see 2 of them. Garrett near the loading bay, someone else she didn't know near the main entrance, positioned with the particular low visibility awareness of people who were watching everything and trying to look like they were watching nothing. The black sedan was gone. The van was gone. But absence wasn't the same as over, and she'd learned that the hard way in places that weren't on public maps. Teal came to stand beside her. "You doing okay?" he said, not in a therapeutic way, just checking function. "I'm fine," she said, which was approximately true. "What you did in this room," he said, "the room defense, the takedown, that's not nursing school." "No," she said. "First group gave you more than medical training." "First group gave me whatever I needed to do the job," she said. "And then they filed my separation papers and classified my record and told me the discrepancy report was a documentation error." She looked out at the parking lot. "I've spent 3 years trying to figure out if I imagined the whole thing." "You didn't," Teal said. "I know that now." Rutherford finished the call. 15 minutes, he said. "Park is getting her up. We need the transmission set up and ready." Teal moved to prepare it. Lauren stayed at the window. 14 minutes later, through a secure connection that Teal's people established using equipment Lauren didn't entirely understand, Commander Dale Rutherford spoke to Representative Diana Khalil, who sounded wide awake and had apparently been waiting for something like this call for 3 years. And the transmission was initiated and the drive that had been in Lauren Mercer's scrub pocket for the last hour and 40 minutes began transferring its contents to a congressional oversight server that existed outside the reach of Admiral Harlan Voss. It took 8 minutes. Lauren watched the progress indicator on Teal's device and thought about 4 soldiers in a valley she couldn't name and a discrepancy report that had gone nowhere, and the way her unit's operational records had been quietly buried while she was being quietly separated. The transfer completed at 3:31 a.m. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Rutherford let out a breath that was the first fully released breath Lauren had heard from him since the ambulance bay, and she thought, that's what 11 soldiers feel like when someone finally finishes the work they died for. She didn't say it out loud. Some things didn't need to be said. Teal was already on his phone. 3 calls in quick succession, each one short. He finished and looked at Rutherford. Congressional receipt is confirmed. Khalil's office has opened an emergency intake. Oversight Council is being notified. He paused. It's out of our hands now, the right hands. Good, Rutherford said. His voice was finally tired. The command authority was still there, but something underneath it had released. Good. Lauren went to check his vitals. BP 102 over 66, which wasn't where she wanted it, but was stable. Heart rate 88. Oxygen at 96. She was adjusting his IV rate when she noticed something she should have noticed sooner. The chest tube drainage bag had changed color. Bright red. Not the older dark drainage that had been there for the last 2 hours. Bright red, fresh, arterial. Dr. Strand, she said into her radio. Her voice had gone flat and sharp the way it went when she was managing something that couldn't afford additional noise. Bay 2, now. I need you now. She moved to the suction control and checked the rate and the volume, and the numbers were wrong in the specific way that meant the bleeding had changed character. What is it? Rutherford said. He could see her face. You've been moving around too much, she said. I told you to lie down. She pressed the call button for the ICU desk and got a voice she didn't recognize and said, I need a surgical consult and I need blood products to Bay 2 immediately. Type O negative until we get his cross-match confirmed. Move. Strand came through the door 40 seconds later. He looked at the drainage bag and looked at Lauren and said, OR3 is on standby. He can't be moved without... I know, Strand said. He was already on the phone calling the OR charge nurse. We're converting Bay 2 to a surgical suite. Get me the mobile unit. He looked at Lauren over the phone. How long has it been changing? I don't know exactly. I wasn't watching it every minute. She looked at Rutherford. You moved when you were on the phone. I had to make the call, Rutherford said. I know you did. She held his gaze. And now I have to do something about the consequence of it. Strand finished his call. 8 minutes for the mobile setup, he said. We need to maintain his pressure until then. Lauren was already at the blood warmer. Teal stood near the door watching this, watching Lauren and Strand move in the coordinated, unpretty way of 2 people doing emergency medicine in a hospital bay that was not equipped for surgery. And then he stepped back and gave them the room. Because that was what was needed. Not operators with weapons, not intelligence assets, just 2 people who knew what they were doing. Rutherford was watching Lauren, not Strand. His eyes were getting heavier with the blood pressure drop and the fatigue of the night and the particular drain of a body that had been under siege for hours. Mercer, he said. I'm here, she said. The drive, it's done, she said. It transmitted. It's in the right hands. She didn't stop working. You just need to stay alive long enough for it to matter. His eyes stayed on her face. You're good at this, he said. His voice was slower now. I know, she said. Why did you let them... He stopped, started again. Why did you let them make you disappear? She pressed the blood warmer release and set the flow rate and didn't answer for a moment. I didn't know what I was disappearing from, she said finally. I thought I'd filed a wrong report. I thought I'd misread the timeline. I spent 3 years wondering if I was the problem. You weren't the problem, he said. I know that now too. The mobile surgical equipment arrived at 3:41 a.m., pushed by 2 OR nurses who'd been pulled from their warm break room and who did not ask unnecessary questions. Strand directed the setup with the focused economy of a man who was genuinely good at his job when the stakes were real, and Lauren assisted in the way of someone who had learned field surgery in a tent and was adapting it backward to a hospital setting. She knew that wasn't typical. She knew Strand knew it wasn't typical. Neither of them said anything about it. At 3:48 a.m., with the bay converted and blood products running and Strand's hands inside Rutherford's chest controlling a bleeder that had let go during the activity of the past 2 hours, Lauren's radio crackled with a voice she hadn't heard before. Low, measured, the voice of a man who was accustomed to being the only person in any room who was not surprised by anything. "This is Admiral Harlan Voss," the voice said. "I'd like to speak with whoever is in charge of this situation." Teal was in the corridor. She heard him pick up. "You've reached someone who is not in charge of this situation," Teal said. "I want to speak to the nurse," Voss said. Lauren looked up from what she was doing. "Nurse Mercer," Voss said. His voice was the kind of calm that was a performance. "You have something that belongs to an active federal operation. I'm prepared to offer significant consideration in exchange for cooperation." Teal's voice, "She's a little busy right now." "Tell her the transmission hasn't completed processing," Voss said. "Tell her the congressional intake is under administrative review." A pause. "Tell her I can make her quiet ears very loud very quickly." Lauren looked at the drainage bag. The color was improving. Strand's hands were steady. She reached over and picked up the radio. "Admiral Voss," she said. Her voice was very flat and very level. A brief silence, then, "Nurse Mercer." "The transmission completed at 3:31 a.m., she said. "I watched it myself. If you're telling me it's under administrative review, you're either lying or you've already lost control of more of this than you know." She paused. "Either way, I have nothing you want anymore." Silence on the line. "I know what happened in Delker Valley," she said. "I filed a report 4 years ago. You buried it, and you sidelined me, and you let me spend 3 years thinking I'd made a mistake." She kept her voice even. "I didn't make a mistake. And you've run out of time to make me think I did." She set the radio down. Strand glanced up at her over his mask. He didn't say anything. From the radio, one more silence, and then the line went dead. Teal's voice came through immediately after. "Voss just disconnected his secure line. He's running." A pause. "Which means he knows the intake processed." Which meant the bluff had failed. Which meant it was over. This part of it. This night's version of it. But in the particular way of things that weren't actually over yet, just transformed. Rutherford's vitals were stabilizing under Strand's hands. Lauren stood in a hospital bay that smelled like antiseptic and had equipment she dragged in from a surgical floor, and she felt the matte black drive sitting in her empty scrub pocket like an absence now. Transferred, received, out of her hands and into the right ones. And then Teal said, "There's a vehicle, coming in fast on the East Access Road, not ours." And Garrett's voice cut with the static of distance. "3 vehicles, moving like they're coming in hot. Hold on. I've got military plates on the lead vehicle." The next voice Lauren heard was not Teal's. It was someone new, on the radio, with a clipped and formal inflection that cut through everything else like a blade through tissue. "Crestline Memorial, this is Lieutenant Colonel Ann Briggs, Army Criminal Investigation Command. We have a federal warrant for the arrest of Admiral Harlan Voss and 11 associated individuals. We are entering the facility. All personnel stand down and identify. I repeat, this is CID. We are coming in." The room was quiet. Strand's hands kept moving. Lauren put her hand on her empty scrub pocket and thought about a drive the size of a thumbnail, and 11 soldiers, and a discrepancy report that had gone nowhere, and the way certain nights ended not with silence, but with the sound of something finally arriving that was supposed to arrive a very long time ago. The East Access Road flooded with headlights. And from somewhere in the building, faint and muffled through 2 sets of doors, came the sound of a man who had run out of running. A voice raised briefly in argument, then cut off by something decisive and unmistakable. Teal's radio crackled. "We have Voss in custody. East Corridor. CID has him." Lauren looked at the drainage bag one more time. The blood running through the tube was darker now. Old blood, not fresh. The bleeder was controlled. But Strand's face above his mask had the particular stillness of a surgeon who had found something he wasn't expecting, and his hands had stopped moving in the specific way that hands stopped when the thing they were looking at required a decision, and he looked up at Lauren with an expression she recognized from the worst moments of her deployment experience. "There's a second bleed," he said. "Deeper. I need the vascular kit." Lauren was already moving. The vascular kit was on the second shelf of the mobile cart, sealed in blue sterile wrap, and Lauren had it open and on the tray before Strand finished the sentence. The problem with the second bleed deeper in the chest cavity was not the bleed itself. It was everything surrounding the bleed. The position, the access angle, the fact that they were working in a converted hospital bay with mobile equipment instead of a proper OR with ceiling-mounted lights and a full surgical team and a perfusionist standing by. The problem was that Strand was a trauma surgeon, and this was crossing from trauma territory into vascular territory, and the tools on the cart were adequate but not ideal, and Rutherford's blood pressure was already low from the first repair. "BP," Strand said without looking up. Lauren checked the monitor. 88/54. "Products?" "Second unit running. Third is warming." "Get me the fourth warmed now." She moved to the warmer and set up the fourth unit and checked the IV lines and came back to the tray and opened the vascular kit with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to move fast in a small space with limited equipment. The instruments were cold, and they made a small sound when she laid them out, and the overhead light wasn't quite right, and she positioned the portable lamp to close the angle. Strand worked without narrating. He was better when he stopped talking about what he was doing and just did it. She'd noticed that across 3 years and 100 cases, the inverse relationship between his commentary and his precision. Right now, he was very quiet. She handed him what he needed before he asked. Some of it she anticipated from the angle of his hands, some from the sequence she knew, some from the particular pause that preceded a request. He noticed. She could tell by the way his rhythm didn't break when she placed the instrument. Rutherford's pressure steadied at 91/58. Not good. Not dropping. "Talk to me," Strand said. "Holding," Lauren said. "Rate's 94. Saturation 93. 93. Still within range for what we're doing." She watched the monitor. "He's compensating." The repair took 19 minutes. Not fast by elective standards. Faster than the situation deserved by emergency standards. Strand closed with the quiet focus of someone doing the most important work of an already strange night. And Lauren managed the field and the vitals and the equipment with the same quiet, and the bay had the particular compressed atmosphere of two people doing something difficult, and neither of them making it about anything except the task. When it was done, Strand stepped back and stripped his outer gloves and looked at the monitors for a long moment. "Pressure's coming up," Lauren said. 96/62. He nodded. His eyes were tired. "Nice anticipation on the retractor," he said, which was, from Strand, approximately the equivalent of someone else's standing ovation. "You telegraphed it," she said. "I don't telegraph." "Second finger," she said. "You shift your second finger before you redirect your hand. It's consistent." He looked at her. Then he looked at his hand. Then he made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same neighborhood. "How long have you known that?" he said. "About 2 years." He shook his head. "Go check on your other patients," he said. "I'll monitor him for the next hour." Lauren pulled off her gloves and went into the corridor. Eatem. The hospital at 4 a.m. had the particular quality of a place that had been through something and was processing it the way institutions process things. Slowly, in pieces, with a lot of people standing in hallways holding clipboards and looking like they were about to make a decision. Lieutenant Colonel Anne Briggs was one of the people in the hallway. She was 43, compact, with close-cropped dark hair and the kind of posture that came from decades of knowing exactly where she stood in any room she entered. She had a tablet in her hand and 3 CID agents arranged behind her at a distance that was professional and deliberate. She looked at Lauren with the direct assessment of someone who had been briefed and was now matching briefing to reality. "Nurse Mercer," she said. "Colonel Briggs." Lauren stopped. "How's the East Corridor?" "Secured." Briggs glanced at the tablet. "Admiral Voss is in federal custody. 2 of his associates were detained in the parking structure. The individuals your team contained inside the building are in the process of being processed." She paused. "You've had a busy night." "There were some complications," Lauren said. The understatement landed in the corridor and sat there. Briggs looked at her for a moment with an expression Lauren couldn't fully read. "We've been building toward a Voss investigation for 8 months," she said, independent of what Commander Rutherford was doing. When his transmission came through to Khalil's office, it intersected with 3 separate CID threads we'd been running. She paused. The complete chain of evidence, Rutherford's material combined with what we already had, it makes this airtight. 14 people, Lauren said. 14 named in Rutherford's documentation. We have a 15th, someone inside the Joint Planning Committee who was facilitating the financial transfers. Briggs's expression didn't change. He tried to access the congressional intake server to pull the transmission back at approximately 3:35 a.m. The access attempt was logged, automatically flagged. She looked at the tablet. "He's being picked up right now." Lauren thought about the transmission completing at 3:31 a.m., about Voss calling on the radio at 3:41 and claiming the intake was under administrative review, about the 4-minute gap between those 2 events. "Someone told Voss the transmission had gone through," she said. "Yes," Briggs said, "and then someone tried to pull it back." "Yes." "So Voss's call to me was a stall," Briggs said. He needed 4 minutes of uncertainty to see if the recall attempt would work. It didn't work. The intake server flagged the unauthorized access and locked the file automatically. She paused. The bluff didn't land because there was nothing to bluff about. The evidence was already beyond his reach. Lauren stood in the corridor with that information and felt something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction exactly, not relief. Something more structural. The feeling of a foundation becoming visible after a long time of standing on ground you weren't sure was solid. "The Delker Valley operation," Lauren said, "is the centerpiece of the federal complaint," Briggs said. "The 4 soldiers who were killed, the resource extraction, the location data transfer." She looked at Lauren directly. "Your discrepancy report from 4 years ago is part of the evidentiary record. It's been pulled from the classified archive where Voss had it buried." Lauren said nothing. "You filed an accurate report," Briggs said. "The timeline inconsistency you flagged was real. You were right." The corridor was quiet. "You were separated from your unit 8 months after that report," Briggs said. "We have documentation that the separation order was influenced by Voss through an intermediary in the personnel division." She paused. "That's a separate action item, but it's part of the same complaint." Lauren looked at the wall, at the bulletin board with the outdated shift schedules, at the drinking fountain that had been out of service since November. She'd spent 3 years in this corridor. 3 years being the night nurse nobody looked at twice, the one who was fast with a needle and quiet during codes, the one whose past was something she kept under a sleeve. "Okay," she said. Briggs waited a moment, then, "Is that all you have to say?" "Right now, yes," Lauren said. "I have a patient in there who just came out of emergency vascular repair, and I need to check his vitals, and I have another patient whose sutures I placed 90 minutes ago and need to assess, and I have an overnight tech named Brianna who is locked in the break room who has been there for 2 hours and deserves to know the building is secure." She looked at Briggs. "Can I do those things first?" Something shifted very slightly in Briggs's expression. Not softness exactly, recognition maybe. "Yes," Briggs said. "We'll be here." Lauren went to the break room first because Brianna had been there the longest. She knocked twice and said, "It's Mercer, it's safe," and heard the lock disengage and opened the door. Brianna was sitting on the floor with her back against the refrigerator and her knees up and her phone in her lap. She was 23 years old and had been doing homework 2 hours ago and had spent the intervening time locked in a break room not knowing what was happening on the other side of the door. She looked up at Lauren. "Is it over?" she said. "This part," Lauren said. Brianna put her head back against the refrigerator. "I heard someone on a radio. Military. Is that Army Criminal Investigation Command," Lauren said. "They have the building. Everyone who shouldn't be here is in custody." Brianna was quiet for a moment. "I was really scared," she said. "I know." Lauren crouched down to her level. "You did everything right." "I almost opened the door twice." "But you didn't." Brianna looked at her with the specific, exhausted sincerity of someone too tired to perform composure. "Are you okay? There's blood on your scrubs."
Lauren looked down. There was. From Strand's repair, from Polk's sutures, from a night that had been operating at a level of sustained intensity that she was only now beginning to feel in her body as fatigue rather than adrenaline. "It's not mine," she said. "That's a very nurse answer," Brianna said. Lauren stood and offered a hand and pulled Brianna to her feet. "Go tell the overnight desk the building is secure, and then make yourself actual coffee, not the vending machine kind. There's a French press in the cabinet above the microwave." "I didn't know there was a French press." "Nobody uses it. The bag's from October, but it'll still work." Lauren moved toward the door. "And when the morning supervisor comes in, you need to document everything you observed tonight. Everything. Time-stamped. Don't edit it and don't soften it." Brianna nodded slowly. "The men at the desk, the badges." "Everything," Lauren said.
"You're a witness. Document it like one." She left Brianna with that and went to check Polk, who was in the bay where she'd sutured him and had fallen asleep in the chair with his head against the wall and his bandaged arm in his lap, which was not the recommended position for a sutured laceration, but was at least a position. And she checked his color and the bandage and decided that waking him up would accomplish less than letting him sleep. Then she went back to Rutherford's bay. Strand was still there. He'd moved the chair to the bedside and was sitting with his forearms on his thighs and his eyes on the monitor in the focused, unfocused way of a surgeon keeping watch. Rutherford was asleep. His pressure was 104/68, rate 82, saturation 95. "Better," Lauren said. "Better," Strand agreed. She checked the drainage bag. Dark, slow, old blood. The right kind of output for this stage. "He'll need imaging at 6, Strand said. "Chest CT. T, full panel. I'll make sure it's ordered." Strand didn't move from the chair. He was looking at Rutherford. "The things he said," Strand said, "about Voss, about the soldiers. Yes. I heard some of it through the wall." He paused. "Your unit, the operation." Lauren didn't answer. "You knew," Strand said. "Not an accusation, just working it out." "I knew there was something wrong," she said. "I didn't know what. I thought I might have been wrong about what I knew." She looked at Rutherford's sleeping face. "That's the part that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't been there. When the institution tells you the thing you observed didn't happen the way you observed it, after long enough you start to wonder." Strand was quiet for a moment. "In medicine we call it gaslighting," he said, "when it happens to patients. When someone spends years being told their symptoms aren't real." He paused. "I've done that to patients. Not intentionally, but I've done it." Lauren looked at him. "Nurses too," he said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the monitor. "I've done it to nurses, including—" He stopped. Started again. "Including tonight. Before. In the trauma bay." "We dealt with it," she said. "I know we did. I'm just—" He made a gesture that was vague and frustrated and more honest than most of the things she'd seen from him. "I'm trying to think about how to not do it again, and I don't quite know what the answer is yet." "The answer is to listen the first time," Lauren said. "I know." He looked at his hands. "That sounds simple when you say it." "It is simple," she said. "It's just not easy." He made the not quite laugh sound again. Then he looked at the monitor and said, "Go, you've been on for 9 hours. Go sit down somewhere." He looked up. "I have him." Lauren looked at Rutherford one more time. Then she went out into the corridor and walked to the nurse's station and sat down in the chair that was her chair on every overnight shift and put her forearms on the desk and looked at the wall. The monitor screens were all normal. The half-power lighting had been restored to full somewhere in the last 30 minutes. The ambulance bay outside was empty, and the parking lot was occupied now by 3 military vehicles and 2 unmarked federal sedans and a Crestline PD cruiser that had shown up late and was making up for it by being very visible. Teal appeared at the edge of her vision. He sat down in the secondary chair, the one for documentation that nobody liked because it didn't roll properly, and looked at the same wall she was looking at for a moment. "Voss is being transported to the federal detention facility in Colorado Springs," he said. "The other 11 named individuals are in various stages of being picked up right now. CID is coordinating with FBI counterparts in 4 states. Lauren nodded. Rutherford's testimony is going to be the centerpiece, Teal said, but the congressional intake and the CID case together, they don't need him to be perfect. The evidence carries without him. Good, Lauren said, because he's not going to be perfect for a while. No? Teal paused. Your discrepancy report. Briggs told me. The full record of what happened after you filed it. The classification, the personnel order, the intermediary Voss used to influence your separation, that's all being pulled into the complaint. He paused. There will be a process. Military records review. It won't be fast. I know how military processes work, she said. Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, what you did tonight, not just the medicine, the way you held this building, the way you handled the men at the desk, the room defense, Strand, all of it. He stopped. Rutherford was right about you. Rutherford got shot and then picked a fight with his own vascular system, Lauren said. I'd hold his judgment lightly. Teal looked at her. Then he said, he spent 14 months building that case. He had access to records that covered 37 personnel files in connection with Delker Valley. He went through everyone. He identified you specifically as someone who had seen enough and was far enough outside the system that you couldn't be compromised. He paused. Out of 37 people, he chose you. Lauren didn't say anything. He wasn't wrong, Teal said. The radio on the desk crackled. Garrett's voice, Teal, we've got a situation at the Federal Transport. Teal's posture changed. Not dramatically, just the small tightening that meant something had shifted. Talk, he said. Voss is claiming he has a standing declassification order that covers the Delker Valley documentation, Garrett said. His attorney is on the phone with the transport supervisor saying the congressional intake should be considered unauthorized access to classified material and that Khalil's office received stolen federal property. Lauren sat up straighter. That's not, she started. I know, Teal said. Into the radio. What's the status on the Congressional Council? Khalil's people are aware. They're responding. A pause. But Voss's attorney is claiming the complaint was filed under improper jurisdiction, and if it sticks, the intake could be challenged at the federal level. It would go to a district court to adjudicate jurisdiction before anything moves, Teal said. Right. The corridor was quiet. Lauren thought about a drive the size of a thumbnail, about 8 minutes of transmission, about a congressional intake server that had automatically locked when someone tried to pull the file back. She thought about something Briggs had said. The access attempt at 335 was automatically flagged. The file was locked. Locked wasn't the same as sealed. Locked was a security state. Sealed was a legal state. The difference mattered in the particular way that differences mattered when an attorney with federal connections was on the phone with a transport supervisor at 4 a.m. Briggs? Lauren said. I need Briggs. Teal keyed the radio. Briggs responded in under 30 seconds. The declassification order Voss is claiming, Lauren said. Does it predate or postdate his appointment to the Joint Planning Committee? A pause. The sound of tablet keystrokes. His appointment was 11 years ago, Briggs said. The declassification order he's referencing, we're looking at it now. It's dated... Another pause. It's dated 14 months ago. 14 months. The same period Rutherford had spent building the case. He created the order after Rutherford started investigating, Lauren said. Briggs' voice sharpened. The order covers documentation within his operational purview, but the financial records, the asset payment logs, those originated outside his purview, outside his declassification authority. He can claim the transmission was unauthorized for the documents within his authority, Lauren said, but not the financial records. The financial records are the chain of evidence, Briggs said. Without the military operational documents, the financial records standing alone still demonstrate the asset payments, the transfers, the connected accounts. A pause that had the quality of someone moving fast through something complex. If his attorney successfully challenges the operational documents on jurisdiction grounds, the financial records still stand as an independent evidentiary basis. Another pause. The complaint doesn't collapse. The tension in the corridor did something that wasn't quite releasing, but more like redistributing, moving from one pressure point to another. But it slows it down, Teal said. It slows it down, Briggs agreed. Jurisdiction challenge means district court. District court means weeks, possibly months, during which Voss's team will be filing motions and the transport status will be... She stopped. Hold on. A longer pause this time. Lauren and Teal looked at each other. Briggs came back. The Congressional Council just filed an emergency motion under the Independent Oversight Protection Act, she said. I'm reading it right now. They're arguing that the intake of the documentation by Representative Khalil's office constitutes a protected legislative action under Article 1 and is immune from executive branch interference, including classification orders. She paused. If the motion holds, the jurisdiction challenge is moot. Has it been filed? Teal said. 20 minutes ago, Briggs said. Khalil's team was apparently already prepared for this. They filed it as soon as Voss's attorney made the call. A pause that sounded like the particular quiet of someone reading something that was going the right direction. The district court has already responded with a temporary stay on any administrative challenge to the intake, pending hearing. She paused. Voss's attorney just went quiet. The radio was silent for a moment. Then Garrett's voice. Transport is moving. They're taking him. Lauren put her hands flat on the desk and looked at them. The left one had a small bruise forming at the base of her thumb from the takedown in the bay. The right one had a tension line across the palm from gripping things throughout the night. Not clean hands, working hands. She looked up at the monitor screens. All normal. The patients who were not Rutherford, who had been sick and scared and in pain through an ordinary Tuesday night ER shift, were breathing and sleeping and receiving exactly the care they'd come here for. Teal was on his phone. One call, short, then another. He looked up. Park, Khalil's chief of staff. He's asking if Rutherford is stable enough for a preliminary statement tomorrow. Just a recorded statement, not testimony. He wants his voice on record before the defense team can build any kind of challenge. Tomorrow, meaning today? Lauren said. In about 6 hours, yes. Lauren thought about the chest tube, the vascular repair, the BP numbers, the drainage rate. If his pressure holds at current levels through 6 a.m. imaging and the CT is clean, I'll discuss it with Dr. Strand, she said. Strand makes the medical call. I'll support whatever he decides. That's fair, Teal said. It's not fair, she said. It's how medicine works. He almost smiled. She stood up and stretched her back and looked at the ambulance bay one more time. Empty, quiet. Teal, she said. He looked up. The 4 soldiers, she said, from Delker Valley. Do they have families? He was quiet for a moment. 2 had spouses. 1 had children, a daughter, 7 years old now. The other 3 were single. He paused. All 4 have surviving parents. She nodded. Didn't say anything else. Just nodded. She went back to the supply room to restock what she'd used, because that was her job and someone would need those supplies on the next shift. And the fact that the night had been what it had been didn't change the fact that the hospital kept moving and the supply levels mattered. She was counting trauma dressings when Strand came to the supply room door. His 6 a.m. imaging, Strand said. I'm going to push it to 5:30. I want more lead time before any external parties come in asking him to do things. Good call, she said. Also, he stopped. He had the coat on and the clipboard and looked like himself again, or like the version of himself he wore in the building. I put in a request through the department head for a formal skills assessment review for you. It's a process where a nurse's clinical competencies are formally documented against their actual training history. Lauren looked at him. It's not a promotion, he said. It's not anything dramatic. It just means your record reflects what you can actually do instead of, he gestured vaguely, instead of whatever it currently reflects. It currently reflects 3 years of night shift nursing, she said. It currently reflects 3 years of you being underutilized, he said, which I'm partially responsible for. The review is the right first step. She looked at him for a moment. Thank you, she said. He nodded once, precise, and went back to his patient. Lauren finished counting the trauma dressings. She wrote the restock order and put it in the system. She washed her hands at the supply room sink and looked at the water running over her palms for a few seconds longer than necessary. At 5:05 a.m., Teal came to find her. His face was wrong. Not alarmed. Teal's face didn't do alarmed, but something in it had shifted in the specific way of a man who had received information he was still deciding how to wait. "What?" she said. "Park just called back," Teal said. "Not about the statement." He paused. "He's been in contact with the Army Records Office, with CID's Records Review Team, about the Delker Valley personnel files." He paused again. "Lauren, your record. The involuntary separation order." "Briggs told me. Voss's intermediary in the personnel division." "Right, the intermediary." He looked at her carefully. "CID pulled the original order tonight as part of the complaint documentation. The order itself is clean on its face. It went through proper channels. It has the right signatures." He paused. "But there's a second document, underneath the separation order in the file. Something that was supposed to have been processed with the separation but wasn't." She waited. "A commendation," Teal said. "Classified. Submitted 14 months before your separation, covering the medevac extraction from Delker Valley." He looked at her steadily. "It was submitted by the commanding officer of the 1st Medical Response Group, citing you specifically for actions during the extraction, medical performance under hostile fire. The specific actions that—" He stopped. "The 4 soldiers you brought out, the ones who survived. They survived because of the medevac procedure." Lauren said nothing. "The commendation was buried in your file," Teal said. "Same level of classification as your discrepancy report. Same person who buried both." He paused. "It should have been part of your official record for 14 years. It wasn't." The supply room was very quiet. She looked at the shelf of trauma dressings she'd just counted and thought about a helicopter and a dust storm and a door she'd kept working through because stopping wasn't a choice you made when there were people in front of you who needed to not die. She thought about 3 years of stepping back and going quiet. "Okay," she said. "That's the second time you've said okay when I expected something else," Teal said. "What did you expect?" He considered it. "I don't know. Something bigger?" "It's 5 in the morning," she said. "I've been on shift for 10 hours. I repaired a man's lung, sutured a laceration, did vascular assist, held a room, and found out that the thing I spent 3 years thinking I'd imagined actually happened the way I remembered it." She looked at the shelf. "The big feelings will catch up eventually. Right now I'm just a night nurse finishing her shift." Teal was quiet. "The commendation," he said finally. "Park says it's being formally reinstated to your record as part of the complaint resolution process. Official Army channel. It'll post within the week." She nodded. "And there's one more thing," Teal said. His voice had shifted slightly. "This one's not about your record." She looked at him. "The daughter," he said. "The 7-year-old. Her father was Corporal David Reyes. He was one of the 4 from Delker Valley." He paused. "He was on the medevac. He was one of the ones you brought out." Lauren went very still. "He didn't make it," Teal said. "He died in the field hospital 14 hours after extraction, but—" "Lauren. The initial extraction. He was alive when you brought him off that valley floor." He paused. "His daughter's name is Emma. She lives with her grandparents in Fort Collins." The fluorescent light in the supply room hummed faintly. Lauren stood in it and thought about a man named David Reyes, whom she had kept alive through a dust storm and a damaged helicopter and 14 minutes of sustained effort, and who had lived 14 hours after, and whose daughter was 7 years old and lived 40 minutes north of where Lauren was standing. She put her hand against the supply room shelf. "The grandparents," she said. Her voice was careful. "Do they know what's coming? The investigation, the charges, all of it going public?" "CID is notifying families today," Teal said. "It'll be handled." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. "No," he said. "I don't know what they know yet." Lauren looked at the shelf for a moment longer. Then she straightened. "When this is over," she said, "when the process runs its course, I want to know if there's a way to reach them." Teal said, "I'll make sure of it." She nodded and went back out to the nurse's station and sat down and pulled up Rutherford's file to check his 5:30 imaging order and make sure it had processed correctly. It had. She was reviewing the order when the ambulance bay radio crackled. Not the hospital dispatch, a different frequency, one that only picked up certain federal channels. and a voice she hadn't heard before said, with the particular measured flatness of someone reading a prepared statement into a record, "Subject Voss, Harlan F., is in federal custody at Colorado Springs Federal Holding. Charges: 18 counts, including conspiracy, accessory to homicide, obstruction of justice, misuse of classified authority, and treason." A pause. All associated subjects are in custody or in process of custody. 14 confirmed arrests. One additional subject currently being located. 15, Briggs had said. The 15th had been trying to access the server at 3:35. Being picked up right now. Lauren listened to the voice finish its statement, and then the frequency went quiet. She sat in the nurse's station in the early dark before morning and looked at the ambulance bay and thought about a Tuesday that had started with blood on the floor and a man who had shoved her away. The overnight desk clock read 5:18 a.m. In 12 minutes, Dr. Strand would send Commander Rutherford for his chest CT. In 4 hours, the morning shift would arrive, and Lauren would give handoff and drive home and sit in her apartment and eventually sleep. In some number of weeks, a classified commendation that had been buried for 14 years would post to her official military record. In some number of months, 14 people would stand in a federal courtroom and answer for what they had done in a valley that didn't appear on public maps. She picked up the overnight chart for documentation and started writing. The sun was not up yet, but the parking lot lights were on, and through the ambulance bay window, she could see the empty road. And at the far end of it, past the last streetlight, the sky had begun doing what skies did at this hour. Not bright yet, not dark anymore. Just the particular in-between that came before everything changed. Her radio crackled. Strand's voice from Rutherford's bay. "Mercer, he's awake. He's asking for you." She set down her pen, and then a second voice came through. Not Strand's, not Teal's. Someone new, patched through from an external line, a woman's voice with the clipped authority of someone who had been awake all night for reasons that mattered. "This is Representative Diana Khalil," the voice said. "I need to speak with the nurse who transmitted the Rutherford package. Immediately." Lauren picked up the radio. "This is Mercer," she said. A pause. "Miss Mercer," Khalil said, "I need you to understand something before we proceed." Her voice was precise and deliberate in the way of someone choosing each word for a reason. "The documentation Commander Rutherford transmitted tonight is sufficient to open a full congressional investigation, but the defense is going to challenge every link in the chain of custody." She paused. "Starting with you." Lauren sat very still. "Your handling of the drive from the point of Rutherford's disclosure to the point of transmission constitutes a critical link in the chain," Khalil said. "The defense is going to argue that a civilian hospital nurse with a classified military background who received sensitive material from a compromised patient under emergency conditions represents an irregular custody chain that compromises the integrity of the evidence. The supply room shelf, the drive in her scrub pocket, the 40 minutes between Rutherford giving it to her and Teal initiating the transmission. They're going to come after you specifically," Khalil said, "not your medical actions. Your custody of the evidence." "I know," Lauren said. "Ms. Mercer." "I know," Lauren said again. "And I can account for every minute of the chain. I received the drive at approximately 1:55 a.m. I placed it in my scrub pocket and did not transfer it to anyone or anything until I gave it to Captain Teal at approximately 3:19 a.m. for transmission initiation." She paused. "I can account for every minute and every location I was in between those two times. So can the hospital's camera system. The cameras they cut were the external security cameras. The internal bay cameras run on a separate backup system that wasn't affected." She paused. "I looked that up 6 months ago when the hospital was considering a security upgrade. I happen to remember it tonight." Silence on the line, then the internal cameras were running. "The entire time," Lauren said. Another pause. Longer. "Ms. Mercer," Khalil said, "I'm going to need you to come to Washington." The early sky through the ambulance bay window had moved further from dark. Lauren looked at it. "When?" she said. "As soon as Commander Rutherford is stable enough to give his preliminary statement," Khalil said. "We move together on this. His medical testimony and your custody testimony, presented simultaneously, closes the chain completely." A pause. The defense's best argument just became their weakest one. Rutherford was asking for her from a bay down the hall. The morning shift was 4 hours away. Lauren sat in the nurse's station with a radio in her hand and thought about 3 years of going quiet. And the particular thing that happened when the quiet you'd made for yourself turned out to be something you were going to have to walk out of eventually, whether you planned to or not. "I'll need to arrange coverage for my shift," she said. "We'll handle it," Khalil said. "I need to check on my patient first." "Of course." Lauren set the radio down and stood and smoothed her scrub top and walked down the hall toward Rutherford's bay, and she was almost to the door when her phone buzzed in her pocket. Not her hospital phone, her personal phone, which almost never received messages at this hour. She stopped in the corridor and looked at it. Unknown number, Colorado Springs area code. The message was 4 words. He told them everything. She stared at the message. Voss. In federal custody. He'd been in transit for less than 2 hours. He told them everything could mean a cooperative statement, could mean a deal, could mean names beyond the 14, information about the operation that went further than what was on the drive, or it could mean something else entirely, something that complicated rather than clarified, something that the next step of this was going to have to navigate. She looked at the message for a long moment. Then she put the phone in her pocket and pushed open the door to Rutherford's bay, because whatever he told them, everything meant she was going to need to know it before she got on a plane to Washington, and the only person in this building who could tell her if it was good news or bad news was the man lying in that bed. Rutherford was sitting up when she came through the door. Not all the way. He didn't have the chest integrity for all the way yet, but enough that she could see his face clearly, and his face had the look of a man who had been waiting for her specifically and not in a patient way. "The message," he said. She closed the door behind her. "You know about it." "Park called me 2 minutes ago. Voss made a proffer to the transport team before they even got him processed." He paused for breath. Talking still cost him something. "He's offering full cooperation. Names, timelines, accounts, everything that's not already on the drive, and some things that are, in exchange for a reduced sentencing recommendation." Lauren stood at the foot of the bed. "How much beyond 14? 7 more, Rutherford said. 3 in the Pentagon's procurement division. 2 congressional staffers, not Khalil's office, other offices. 1 federal judge who helped classify the Delaware Valley investigation at the district level." He stopped and breathed. "And 1 active duty general who was present for the original resource extraction planning." 21 people. That was not the same conspiracy she'd been carrying in her head for the last 3 hours. That was something larger, with more architecture, more deliberately constructed over more time by more people who had looked at 11 soldiers and 4 more and calculated that the math worked in their favor. "Does the proffer change the case?" she said. "It strengthens it," Rutherford said. The defense wanted to argue the drive was a selective picture. Voss cooperating means the full picture comes in regardless of what his defense team does with the chain of custody argument. He looked at her steadily. "They can't challenge your handling of the evidence if the man who ordered the cover-up is the one filling in the gaps himself." The corridor outside was quiet. The early morning hospital quiet that was different from the middle of the night quiet. Less tense, more tired. The specific silence of a building that had been holding its breath and was starting to exhale. "He's trying to save himself," Lauren said. "Completely," Rutherford said. "He's scared. The Congressional Protection Act motion Khalil filed took away his best exit. He's calculating what's left." He paused. He spent 11 years building something he thought was solid. It came apart in one night because a nurse in an ER recognized a tension pneumothorax. Lauren looked at him. "I'm not romanticizing it," Rutherford said. "I'm just telling you what's true. The whole chain of what happened tonight goes back to that bay. To you not walking away when they told you to." She pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down, which was something she hadn't done in several hours. Her feet registered it immediately, in the specific way of feet that had been carrying a person through a high-stress situation and were now owed a conversation about that. "The drive was the work," she said. 14 months of your work." "The drive gets us to a congressional hearing," Rutherford said. "What gets us to a conviction is the full chain, and the full chain held because of decisions you made tonight." He looked at the ceiling for a moment. I've been in rooms where the person who should have acted didn't, more times than I can count. You're not that person. She thought about 3 years of being that person. 3 years of stepping back, filing down her edges, making herself fit a space that had been built for someone with a smaller history. I spent a long time thinking I was, she said. I know, he said. That's what they wanted. The word they landed differently at 5:30 a.m. with 21 names and a federal proffer and a 7-year-old girl in Fort Collins. It was bigger and more deliberate than the they she'd been living with, the diffuse, ambient they of institutional dismissal, the kind that didn't require conspiracy because ordinary bias did the same work with less coordination. What Voss had done was a specific, intentional version of the same thing. Find the person who knew too much, reduce them until they doubted themselves, and then count on the doubt to hold. The doubt had held for 3 years. What Voss hadn't counted on was a Tuesday night and a sucking chest wound and a nurse who recognized both. She was still thinking about that when Strand came in for the pre-imaging check and ran his assessment with the quiet efficiency she'd come to recognize as his best self, and he cleared Rutherford for transport to imaging, and he looked at Lauren and said, "You should go home after this." "I have a handoff." "I'll do the handoff," he said. "I'll cover it." She looked at him. "Go home," he said. "Sleep. Come back when you're a person again." She could not immediately argue with this, which told her something about her current state. She didn't go home. She went to the break room, made coffee from the French press that nobody knew existed, and sat at the table and drank it slowly while the morning shift began to arrive in pieces. The day-charge nurse first, then 2 floor nurses, then a tech who came in and stopped in the doorway when he saw her and said, "Rough night?" And she said, "A little," and he said, "Cool," and went to his locker, and she appreciated the complete lack of follow-up more than she could express. Teal found her there at 6:20. He sat down across from her without asking if he could, which was consistent. "Imaging is clean," he said. "Strand signed off on his condition for preliminary statement purposes. Park is coming in from Denver. He'll be here by 9. "Khalil's people?" "Coordinating with CID's statement will be recorded in his bay, witnessed by CID and Congressional Counsel, transmitted simultaneously to the Oversight Committee and the federal complaint file." He paused. "They want you in the room." "For the custody testimony." "For that, and because Rutherford asked." He looked at his coffee, which he'd clearly gotten from the vending machine and which was visibly worse than what she had. "He said he doesn't want to do it without you in the room, not for any legal reason, just—" He made a gesture. "Just because." Lauren looked at her cup. "After Washington," Teal said, "what happens to you?" She hadn't thought past Washington. She'd been thinking in increments all night. Next vital sign, next problem, next decision. And Washington was as far forward as she'd gotten. "I don't know yet," she said. "The records review," he said. "The commendation. CID is also looking at the separation order itself. There's a process for reversal of involuntary separation orders when influence is demonstrated." "I know the process," she said. "It would restore your military standing, your grade. Your service record would reflect the full 6 years with the correct characterization of service." She turned the cup in her hands. "I left 6 years ago," she said. "I'm not sure who I'd be going back to." "You don't have to go back," Teal said. "The review restores what was taken. What you do with it is a separate question." She looked at the wall across the break room. Someone had put up a printout of the hospital's Employee Appreciation Awards from last quarter, 4 names in a framed certificate. She wasn't on it. She never was. Not because she hadn't done the work, but because the kind of work she did wasn't the kind that got nominated. The 2 a.m. interventions, the quiet reads, the things that only mattered if you noticed what wasn't happening yet. "My patient, Brianna," Lauren said, "the overnight tech. She held that desk for 2 hours in the middle of something she had no preparation for. She didn't have training or backup or any real authority, and she stood her ground anyway." She paused. "Make sure someone documents that." Teal looked at her steadily. "I mean it," she said. "Not a footnote. An actual documented commendation in the hospital's record." "I'll make sure of it," he said. She nodded, finished her coffee, set the cup down. "I'm going to check on Rutherford before Park gets here," she said. And then I'm going to sit with him until the statement is done. And then I'm going to call my supervisor and arrange leave. And then I'm going to go home and sleep for approximately 12 hours. She stood. And then I'm going to figure out what comes next. Teal stood too. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. Owen Park arrived at 8:47 a.m. with 2 congressional attorneys, a CID liaison officer, and a recording setup that took 20 minutes to calibrate in Rutherford's bay. Lauren stood against the wall through the calibration and let the various professionals do what they came to do, and Rutherford watched her from the bed with the specific patience of a man who had learned to wait for the right moment. When the recording began, Rutherford gave his statement in the careful, detailed, chronological manner of someone who had rehearsed the sequence of it in his own mind for 14 months. He named Voss. He named the operation. He named the soldiers and the timeline of the resource extraction and the location data transfer and the financial accounts and the 11-person conspiracy as he had known it at the time the drive was compiled. He noted that the proffer from Voss had since expanded the number to 21, and that he was prepared to supplement his statement with additional detail as that information was verified. He spoke for 43 minutes. When he finished, one of the congressional attorneys looked at the recording setup and said, "That's sufficient for the initial record." And Park said, "We'll schedule the formal deposition for next week contingent on medical clearance." And Strand, who had been standing near the door, said, "I'll have a recommendation by Thursday." Then everyone except Lauren started packing up. Rutherford looked at her. "Your turn," he said. Her custody testimony took 12 minutes. Not because it was complicated, but because it wasn't. The sequence was clean, the times were precise, the internal camera record confirmed every location and every handoff, and the chain from the moment Rutherford placed the drive in her hand to the moment the transmission completed was unbroken and documentable at every link. When she finished, one of the attorneys said, "We have what we need for the chain of custody." She nodded. Rutherford said, "Thank you." She looked at him. "Both things," he said. "The medicine and the rest of it." "The medicine was my job," she said. "And the rest?" She thought about a 14-gauge needle and a hiss of air, about a laryngoscope handle in her left hand and a radio in her right, about a woman who had stepped back a long time ago and was now, in this bay, in this morning, done stepping back. "The rest was also my job," she said. "It just took me a while to remember that." Tia, the federal charges against Admiral Harlan Voss were filed publicly 3 days later. 18 counts, as the transport officer had read. The public filing added the supplemental names from the proffer, 21 individuals total. The Department of Defense issued a simultaneous press release confirming the arrest and the opening of a congressional investigation into the Delker Valley operation, the resource extraction, and the classification misuse. The press covered it the way the press covered things that were simultaneously large and complicated, in fragments with varying degrees of accuracy, with a particular hunger for the parts that were simple enough to explain in a headline. Navy Admiral arrested in military corruption case. Congressional investigation opened. 11 soldiers' deaths linked to deliberate intel compromise. Lauren read the headlines on her phone from her apartment couch and thought about the way media translated things that were large and human into things that were manageable and categorical, and she didn't feel anything uncomplicated about any of it. There wasn't a version of this where the right thing had happened quickly. There was only a version where it was happening now, slowly and imperfectly, through the processes that existed to make it happen, and where the people who had done the damage were being held in the light they'd spent 11 years keeping themselves out of. Voss appeared before the federal magistrate on the 4th day. He was 62 years old and had spent 11 years being the most powerful person in whatever room he occupied. In the court footage that circulated, brief, formal, the standard 30 seconds of a magistrate hearing, he looked diminished in the specific way of men whose power was architectural. Remove the structure, and what was underneath wasn't strength. It was just a man in a suit who had made a series of choices and was now being asked to account for them in a room where the credentials didn't work. He entered a conditional guilty plea on 7 of the 18 counts, contingent on full cooperation with the ongoing investigation. His attorney cited his proffer and his decades of service. The magistrate cited the specific counts and set a sentencing hearing. Across the 14 additional co-defendants, outcomes varied.
3 took plea deals in the first week. 4 contested and were remanded pending trial dates. The active duty general resigned his commission the morning his name was released publicly and retained 3 separate defense attorneys. The federal judge whose signature had helped bury the Delaware Valley investigation filed for early retirement and was denied. You did not get to exit the accountability process by timing your retirement to precede it. Lauren didn't follow every development. She followed enough. She had learned a long time ago that watching a system work wasn't the same as participating in it, and what she needed right now was the knowledge that it was working, not the daily forensics of how. She went to Washington 11 days after the night at Crestline Memorial. She sat in a room in the Hart Senate office building across from Representative Diana Khalil and 2 members of the Armed Services Subcommittee, and she gave her account of the chain of custody and answered questions for an hour and 40 minutes. And she was asked twice to characterize her military background, and both times she gave the same answer. 6 years of service in a role that required medical competency under hostile conditions, and she was prepared to provide her full service record for the committee's review. Her service record now showed the commendation. She noticed that it affected how people looked at her in the room. She noticed it, and she thought about all the years the commendation had spent buried and what it would have meant to have it visible. Whether it would have changed anything, whether it would have changed how she carried herself through 3 years of night shifts and quiet dismissals. Maybe. Maybe not. She suspected she would have found something else to doubt about herself. That was the thing about institutional dismissal. It found the existing cracks and widened them, and the cracks were there independent of the institution. The work was learning to operate with the cracks rather than pretending they'd been sealed. Khalil walked her to the hallway afterward. "You're aware the committee will reference your testimony in the formal investigation report," Khalil said. "Yes." "Your name will be part of the public record." "I know." Khalil looked at her directly. She was in her mid-50s, with the particular quality of attention that came from years of listening to people who assumed she wasn't. "How are you feeling about that?" Lauren thought about it honestly. 3 weeks ago, I would have said that being in a public record was the last thing I wanted, she said. Now I think the record is what matters. Not because I need to be in it, because the other people who should have been in it and weren't, the ones from Delaware Valley, they deserve a record that's accurate. Khalil nodded. "The families are being notified of the investigation findings this week," she said. "All families of personnel involved in the operation." "I know," Lauren said. "I asked to be told when that happened." "Someone from CID will be in contact with you about the Fort Collins family specifically," Khalil said. "If you want to be connected to them at a point when the family is ready." She had thought about Emma Reyes, 7 years old, growing up without a father. Every day since Teal had told her the name. Not in a consuming way, in the way of something that sat quietly in the periphery and waited. "Yes," Lauren said, "when they're ready." She went back to Crestline Memorial 2 weeks after Washington, not to her night shift, that was still on hold while the hospital administration figured out how to handle the fact that their ER had been the site of a federal operation that was now in the congressional record. She went because Rutherford was still there. He'd been moved out of the ICU bay on day 4 and into a standard monitored room, and he was walking short distances by day 9. And on the day Lauren came back, he was sitting in the chair by the window, in clothes rather than a hospital gown, which was the clearest possible signal of trajectory. He looked better. Not well. The chest was still compromised, the repair sites needed months, and he moved like a man who was continuously recalibrating his relationship with his own ribcage. But his eyes were clear and his color was back, and the particular quality of focused tension that had been in his face all night at the hospital had resolved into something quieter. "Mercer," he said. "Commander," she said. "Dale," he said. She sat in the second chair. The window looked out on the same parking lot she'd been watching all night 3 weeks ago. In daylight, it was an ordinary parking lot, remarkable only in being the place where a black sedan had made 2 slow passes at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in February. They talked for an hour. About Washington, about the committee, about the investigation timeline and the sentencing hearing, and the supplemental testimony Rutherford would give in 6 weeks when he was medically cleared for deposition. About what came after for him. A medical retirement he hadn't asked for but would accept because his chest wasn't going to be what it had been.
and a consulting role with the oversight committee that Khalil had offered, and he was considering, about what came after for her. The Army Records Office sent me a formal letter, she said, reversing the separation characterization. The involuntary separation order has been rescinded and replaced with an honorable discharge effective the original separation date. How does it feel? He said. Strange, she said. I've been carrying the wrong version of it for 6 years. The correct version is going to take time to feel real. But it is real, he said. It is real, she agreed. Are you going back? He said. To service. She looked at the parking lot, at the ordinary Tuesday afternoon of it. No, she said. I thought about it. But what I can do here, the work in an ER, the things I can see that other people miss, that matters too. She paused. I think I stopped believing it mattered. That's the thing I'm working on getting back. Rutherford was quiet for a moment. Strand put in the skills assessment? It's been processed, she said. It goes to the nursing board next month. There's a clinical pathway, it's not a fast process, but it opens the door to a different scope of practice. Good, he said. She stood to leave and he said, one more thing. She waited. I'm testifying about the unit, he said, the full operational history. In the formal deposition, I'm going to say what I know about every member I can account for. He looked at her directly, including you. What you did in that valley, what you filed, and what happened to the filing and the years after. He paused. The record is going to be complete, every piece. She stood in the afternoon light in a hospital room and thought about a hiss of air and a monitor climbing back and a Tuesday that had started with a man telling her to get out of his sight. And she thought about the particular stubbornness required to not go away, to step back but stay in the room, to be quiet but not absent, to wait until the moment when the waiting was over. Make it accurate, she said. That's all I know how to do, he said. On a Thursday morning in April, 2 months after the night at Crestline Memorial, Lauren Mercer drove to Fort Collins. She drove the 40 minutes north on a morning that had that particular Colorado clarity of early spring, cold still, the mountains visible from the highway in a way they weren't in summer, the sky the specific shade of blue that didn't have an equivalent anywhere she'd lived. She had called ahead. A CID liaison had made the first contact, prepared the family, asked if they were open to meeting. Corporal David Reyes's parents, Walter and Nora, had said yes. Their granddaughter Emma had been told that someone was coming who had known her father, which was the right amount of truth for a 7-year-old, and also, Lauren thought, the fullest version of it. The house was a single story on a quiet street with a dog in the yard and a basketball hoop with a net that needed replacing. Walter Reyes opened the door and shook Lauren's hand and had the eyes of a man who had been carrying something for 4 years and was beginning, carefully, to set it down. She sat in their kitchen for 3 hours. She told them what she could tell them. Not everything, not the operational detail, but the part that was hers to give. What she had done in the valley. The 14 minutes, the dust storm, and the helicopter door, and the specific, particular human fact of David Reyes being alive and talking when the helicopter touched down at the field hospital. Nora Reyes held a coffee cup in both hands and looked at Lauren and said, "He was alive when he got there." "Yes," Lauren said. "We were told—" She stopped. "We were told he died on extraction." "No," Lauren said. "He was alive. He lived for 14 hours. She looked at Nora steadily. "I know it doesn't change the ending, but he lived through the valley. He made it to the hospital. That's true, and it should have been part of what you knew." Nora was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "It matters." "Yes," Lauren said, "it does." Emma came into the kitchen at some point during the afternoon, small, brown-eyed, with the specific energy of a 7-year-old who had been told to wait and had waited about as long as she could. She looked at Lauren with direct, uncomplicated curiosity. "You knew my dad?" she said. "Briefly," Lauren said. "But yes." "Was he brave?" Lauren thought about a man on a helicopter floor in a dust storm, conscious and coherent, asking about the other people before asking about himself. "Very," she said. Emma nodded seriously, as if this confirmed something she'd already decided, and went back to whatever she'd been doing. Just like that. The way children metabolize things, fast and whole, without the layers adults put over everything. Lauren drove home in the late afternoon with the mountains still visible in her rearview mirror and thought about the difference between a story being over and a story being done. Over meant it had ended. Done meant every part of it had been completed. Every thread followed to its conclusion. Every debt acknowledged. Every person who deserved to know something given the chance to know it. The investigation wasn't over. The trials would take years. Voss's sentencing hearing was 4 months out. The military records review would generate paperwork she'd be signing until fall. But something was done. 14 years of the wrong version of a story slowly being replaced with the accurate one. She thought about what people assumed when they looked at her. The night shift nurse with the quiet effect and the unexplained competencies. The woman who stepped back when she was told to. The person nobody thought to ask about. She thought about all the time she'd spent wondering if she was the problem, and all the people who had been served by that wondering, who had depended on her staying small enough to ignore. She thought about Brianna standing at the nurse's station with her arms crossed, and her face set, and her hands invisible, shaking. You can shake and still do the right thing. She'd said that. She believed it more now than when she'd said it. The thing about being dismissed was that it was never really about the person being dismissed. It was about the person doing the dismissing, and what they needed to be true in order to remain comfortable, and how much easier everything was when the people who could challenge them stayed quiet. The quiet was the point. The quiet was what they were building when they said, "Let the surgeon work and get me a real doctor and you're making a mistake." The quiet was the whole project. Lauren had been quiet for 3 years. She had stepped back and gone small and spent her competencies in the spaces where nobody was watching, and she had filed the discrepancy report on herself every night she drove home from a shift where she had seen things and not said them because the system had told her once that the things she saw weren't real. She would not do that again. Not because the night at Crestline had made her invincible. She was not invincible. She had a bruise on her thumb and a gap in her sleep schedule, and a complicated set of feelings about Fort Collins that she was going to be sitting with for a while. But because she had learned, in a very specific and irreversible way, what it cost to keep a person quiet, what it cost the person, what it cost the people around them, what it cost the soldiers in a valley who needed someone to notice that the timeline was wrong. The cost was too high. She pulled into the parking lot of Crestline Memorial at 5:47 p.m., not because she was starting a shift, but because she'd left a jacket in her locker and it was cold and she was going to need the jacket in the morning when she came back for her first day shift in 11 years of nursing. She went through the ambulance bay because it was the fastest way. The bay was empty, clean, the particular impersonal readiness of a space that was always waiting for the next thing. She went through it the same way she'd come through it 100 times. Badge, door, corridor. The familiar smell of antiseptic and recycled air and whatever the cafeteria had made that afternoon. The sound of monitors from the rooms off the main hall. The nurse's station with the rolling chair that was hers and the secondary chair that was worse. Brianna was at the desk. Different shift now. She'd moved to days since that night, which was a reasonable response to a traumatic Tuesday evening. She looked up when Lauren came through, and she had the expression of someone who wasn't quite sure what protocol applied. "Hey," Brianna said. "Hey," Lauren said, "just getting my jacket." "Dr. Strand left something for you," Brianna said. "In your mailbox. He said to make sure you got it." Lauren went to the staff mailbox bank. Her slot had an envelope. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of hospital letterhead, a formal skills assessment completion notice. Her name, her credentials, her training history fully documented against her current role. At the bottom, in Strand's handwriting rather than typed, a single line. "You were right. You've always been right. V.S." She stood at the mailbox bank in the late afternoon light coming through the ambulance bay windows and held the piece of paper, and she thought about the specific texture of being seen. Not celebrated, not performed over, just seen. Accurately, finally, by someone who had looked at her wrong for 3 years and looked again. She folded the letter and put it in her jacket pocket. She walked back through the ambulance bay. Outside, the Colorado sky was doing what it did in April, moving fast, clouds coming down from the mountains, the light changing by the minute. The parking lot was ordinary. The road beyond it was ordinary. Somewhere 40 minutes north, a 7-year-old girl was doing homework or arguing about bedtime or asking her grandmother questions about a father she was still piecing together from other people's memories. Lauren stood at the edge of the ambulance bay in the moving light and thought about the woman who had walked into this building 3 years ago with a buried commendation and a discrepancy report that had gone nowhere, and a tattoo she kept covered and a past she'd spent years making smaller than it was. That woman was not gone. She was still here. She just wasn't staying quiet anymore.